Good morning, everyone. Welcome to another Tuesday train with the 2MK team. We are, as always, playing Guilty Gear Xrd Rev 2. The last couple of weeks we've had a few weirdnesses in terms of us getting cut off midway, but at least last week we were able to recover and continue for the standard amount of time, so we're expecting to see more or less the same this week. This week the plan is working on air stuff, tech, and various movement. As well as some struggles we've been having in neutral for certain players anyway. Learning how to pin down an opponent who has recovered is actually fairly important in this game. Some characters use a lot of meter to do this, and others use it as a chance to build up their own meter rather than actually chasing the opponent all that hard. What you have here is a sign of each one. Jackal can use her chases, assuming she has enough minions out to build meter. Whereas Jam generally builds up other things rather than bothering to chase the opponent at all. Understanding which rhythm your opponent has can really help as well. Since you can use that information to make your changes and pick up some moves or some options that you couldn't otherwise use based on that complete expectation of your opponent moving a particular way. It is more of a read than a reaction by far, but sometimes that read is worth it, particularly because in nearly every situation where you are trying to catch an opponent who is air recovering, you would have been at advantage. Even if your advantage was relatively small, understanding your opponent's options in the air, of which some characters are relatively lacking, can help you to pull off some really interesting things. Another place where this really matters, which we have not really gone into in Guilty Gear so much, is your corner guard ability. So, for this stream, we'll be paying attention to corner guard flows, and things we use based on our understanding of where our opponent wants to react to. In order to facilitate this, I'll of course be playing a little more seriously than usual from my side, but I don't expect it to change too much for the team as a whole, given what the aim is. Since Nanakan is playing new characters this week, we'll have a little bit more to talk about. We did quite a bit of collection at Red Bull Conquest in terms of data, but to cut it back to the things that everyone needs to understand, the concept is simple. Kumiya Yun's main game plan is about setting up extremely powerful long combos and catching the opponent in Oki. Usually this is a setup that is achieved by changing the situation so that the player eventually gets caught in a terrible mix-up. As the player gets better and better, this makes it more and more likely. The interesting thing about this is that it means that you playing more riskily and more randomly against this character is a little bit better. At the very least, when Kum is sending out his first attack, his first setup, or his mix-up, if you know that you are going to have to block this move or do something risky, your general better option is to take the risk. Because if you take the hit, many of his initial moves that are intended to set things up do not in fact do a lot of damage, and if you let them hit you, you do not end up getting caught in his traps, long combos, or anything else, and it becomes harder for him to build up tension. Now, for an absolute beginner, what this generally means is play like a nut. Obviously, this is not a great plan against experienced players, because if you know that's the basic strategy for your character, and you know therefore that your opponent's basic strategy will be to try to get out of it, in that way, you'll try to bait them. But as a general rule, if you think you have the reaction to do something but aren't confident, you aren't sure, but you know, I might be able to get this, there's like a 50-50 chance I'll get this, you should absolutely take your 50-50 chance rather than put up with general options that Kum has, because the better the player is, the more likely the situation is that this is not really a matter of options so much as it is a matter of you being set up to die. Here's one good example. By attempting to slide through Kum's super, as soon as the player has attempted to go for the setup, they'll find themselves completely lost, in the sense that, yes, they'll hit, but what they were expecting to happen, the block and then the setup, he has to move in order to set this up. Taking the hit means that the movement changes the situation for the player. There you see again, by simply taking a risk and instead getting hit, usually if you get better at the game, you can do it a different way, but for initial points, just take the risk. Note that this is specifically a risk. It has to be some option that you think has a chance of actually making contact, of stopping the attack, and so on. It's not just do a move so that you get hit instead. It's specifically trying to find a move that will benefit you if you managed it in time. If you are really good, or just learning it but want to look out for it, your better option is to look for the movement from Kum himself that you can counter. Since the higher level player will wait for you to do the risky thing and punish it, but this also means that if they wait too long, they give up their pressure, or whatever else they had in mind. Learning to take risks against this character is one of the most important things you can do for yourself. The situation for Jacko was a little different. Since Jacko is a character that actually loses something outright for taking hits, she cannot keep up pressure with her minions if she is getting hit at the time. However, she does have a good set of options that take her entirely over Kum's things, and put him on the defensive even when he is setting up stuff. In other words, Jack-O can fly, and that's probably the most important part of her ability. The rest is, as shown here, negating Kum's projectiles for a short period when she feels like she could get an advantage by going in. It's therefore a really simple game plan, at least at the low levels. When she's built up enough minions to get a benefit from going in, she should activate her barrier if she has it. Otherwise, she just fly around and try to be as annoying as possible, using her meter to blast downward and have her minions do the rest of the work. Kum does, however, have a lot of good buttons for advancing on Jack-O very quickly. And she does not have a lot of really strong options for pushing Kum back. Her long buttons are helpful, but he can always move through them with some of his own. Her own? Whatever you want to consider it to be. Their own! Yes, probably how it should be said. Kum is also a character that often gets caught in the explosions because, despite being so good at movement, overall, Kum is not a particularly good character at destroying Jack-O's houses, interestingly, particularly when they're behind. Poor back walk speed and a lot of lost damage and similar when moving backward as a whole meaning that proper management is really useful here. When in front, the situation isn't as good, so Jackals often aim to get over Kum's head and take the hit in that way, which plays into the rest of the playstyle relatively well. This moment, for example, is exactly what we talked about. A moment to activate the projectile invincibility, take control of that space in the match, and set up situations. It is also good to put the houses in these positions, as Kum cannot advance without ending up in this position. Is this blocked? It is not. Therefore, it is actually interesting that one of the best possible positions for houses is exactly as you see here, just in front of the corner where Kum is likely to stick around it long enough to try to destroy it there before leaving said corner, giving Jackal all sorts of other small advantages. But any situation like this is useful. Jackal can usually at this position make the houses all explode, and that's the end of the round. Jam has a much harder time doing this. Hyun covers a lot more space and can defend against her really well on nearly all approach vectors except one. The important thing, therefore, is to realize when you've given the opponent a reason to believe you're going to do a certain thing, and when you haven't. Which leads us back to what we were discussing before. Kum's long range means it's also difficult a lot of the time to utilize Jam's longer buttons and to count on having any time to charge cards without a hard knockdown. But you don't have any specific chance to get this, as Kum's moves are also hard counters for particular types of hit. Meaning if your opponent is just saying, I'm going to avoid being knocked down, they know what to do. Understanding when you can in fact be aggressive is therefore the part you are trying to decipher. Moving through different motions of Kum's is quite possible, but whether or not you can actually utilize this is different. You can immediately see the contrast because against Kai, Jam just has positions where she can hit buttons and Kai generally shouldn't do anything to challenge him, despite having good footsie buttons for nearly every situation. Against Kai, Jam also does not want to constantly use her forward movement, as he will just counter it quite often. Characters who have strong, high attacks that can help with their corner guard do not have to chase the opponent to the corner immediately, as they don't need to set up any given position. They can either stay out or even backdash out in certain situations, creating a space that the opponent sees as one they can move into, and then quickly move back in and fill that space. Kuma is actually a character like this as well, whereas Jack-O has a bit more trouble doing it without minions, meaning that she often has to either stick to the player or give up the corner pressure outright. This generally means, however, that unless Jack-O has control of a certain aspect of the space, she struggles to build up enough meter to do this naturally. She does, however, have one real huge advantage, one of the longest range command grabs in fighting games. Understanding how to use this move in neutral, though, requires a different mindset altogether than most. In short, what is it that lets an opponent get into a mindset where run-up command grab is a thing? Nothing. That is the answer. But a long command grab can function in a way that nearly nothing else can. As difficult as the execution can be, it means you have one of the longest unblockable whiff punishes in the game. And nearly anyone with any standard playstyle in fighting games reacts to trying an unsafe move and failing by blocking right after it. This is a strength of all grapplers in almost all fighting games. If the opponent wants to maintain a particular spacing, they're not going to want to backdash and back off. In many cases, your command grab is powerful enough to properly punish the move regardless, but if you were out of place and your opponent was just blocking right after, your situation is still good because it does not matter if they were blocking or not. Heihyun is a character against whom Jackal needs this option a lot. There are many moves that this character uses that drop right in front of her, but end up being blocked. The difficulty with this is that Jackal's execution of this move often requires either a micro step or a micro run, which is super hard to do when stressed out. Part of the reason why this is so important, though, as noted, is that Jackal has to build up meters somehow. And perfectly spaced deletion drivers are one of the best possible ways to do that. She can also do something similar to a safe jump into it, but not in all situations, especially not against characters with buttons as long as Goose. It becomes more useful once minions are around, though, because while the hit stun does somewhat protect the player from this move, not a lot. The hit stun given from these is very small, and having minions around to help out means that the situation just shifts in her favor pretty fast. And there you see the final piece. When Jackal is unsure if the opponent will be in the correct position, she can in fact use her own spacing and her Roman cancel to get into position to do a Elysian driver, but not necessarily to launch an attack, which is what the opponent is often expecting. One strong advantage of building up this style, even though it is the riskier style you could play with her, is that it makes the opponent less likely to stay close. They tend to backdash out to make sure they don't get caught in the move, giving Jao time to build up all sorts of things. And if they backdash out of the move, for most characters it's actually really hard to punish it despite the fact she has a long recovery. In short, understanding how to use this move as a whiff punish drives certain characters in this game crazy simply because they don't have the range to make her life miserable enough. This is easy when you're thinking, oh well, I just have to figure out how to block against this character. As soon as you factored in, oh, I can't block anymore, Jackal becomes scarier, by far. However, do note that if you were trying to master this without having mastered all the other things our Jackal player has done over the many streams we've had, you will have a hard time simply because the flow of the move is the end game, the end goal of all her other styles of movement and understanding. has a difficult time with this character for only one specific reason, but that reason's kind of large. Kum, again, it's sort of like Jam but backwards. Axel can't get Kum off him. And the character has at least 2 ways to really push through Axel's stuff and make sure he gets in close in the first place. Axel's recoveries also don't lead to really strong attacks of Axel's own in the air. Just little pokes that, while they are not necessarily counterable or easy to deal with, you still don't have a strong method for dealing with getting hit. So we're back to thinking about how can I best move after my recovery to give myself advantage. But if we apply the same principle for Axel as we do for all other characters against Kum, it becomes actually a little easier to do. And there you have it. Kum is actually weak on the approach against that particular move. As Axel can do it with a timing, that means that Kum is already in a move and can't do anything else in particular. Well, this matchup will get a little less discussion, i.e. probably none, because Axel does not actually have strong options for recovering against Kai, nor the other way around. Kai's moves that do pop Axel into the air or control his movement generally don't have any real strong recovery out of it. You either are too far away for Kai to do anything more, or you're not. Similarly, when Axel hits Kai, not only does he not care about the recovery, he almost always wants to go backward. When he doesn't want to go backward, it's not only super obvious, it's super easy. Just one of those straightforward character things.
戦闘スタイルの異なる相手から学ぶことは実に多い。私の所作もあなたの糧になれば幸いです。ジャック王様、アクセル。シューターは練れていますか？
パフォーマンスも把握しとくか。まあいいわ。応戦します。
クールな負け方考えてる。気負いたたむよう親善試合第1開始。
As we previously mentioned, Axel does best in this matchup by approaching every now and again to reset the spacing. Unlike most characters where he can expect to wait for his turn in the opponent attempting an attack and failing, Jaco is mostly going to stand wherever you put her and do her stuff from there, as she has enough options for the job. The two characters also don't interact in a way that leads to her getting too close to him in most situations. At least not close enough to do much beyond standing dust. That therefore becoming one of her stronger options in the matchup. It does lead to good damage, it leads to long amounts of time in the setups, which is one of her most important aspects in any matchup, but against Axel particularly, it's super important. Now you would think that this should mean, well, Axel should just not crouch block. But that is way harder than you think, as he's not only a character who, even though he does walk slowly, he does move backward in useful ways for her in the other situation. He also isn't so great at attacking characters approaching directly under him while he is in the air. Most other characters, if they see an incoming Jackal, will hit a particular button while in the air in order to deal with it. Axel has one option for this, and in certain spacings it will still lose to Jackal's follow-up punch. Jackal's aim, therefore, is, unlike most matchups where she can count on her minions, to spend a lot of time using her own physical skills to change situations. She can, however, when she's at the beginning and hasn't got set up yet, use the projectile invincibility to help against the spacing Axel wants to be at for a little bit. And then just shift if the opposing Axel seems to actually be aggressive enough that it matters. In this situation though, once she's run out of meter, it does get a little iffy, and that is when Axel should generally take his best option to go in and try to pin her down. 'So, how can Kum get past Axel's Rensen into spin? The easy answer is to simply not do anything, to let himself get pushed out like every other character, and then move in from very far away. Meaning that Axel has to spend a lot more time carefully judging ranges and options, and Kum can vary a lot of things, as you've just seen. Axel doesn't have a whole lot of super great direct upward attacks, meaning that it's hard for him to pin down where Kum is going to be, and therefore Kum has a lot of options. Getting into the correct position and then going straight in though is probably one of the more useful options as well. There's a good poke to deal with the supposed pressure incoming, but a miss on the final counter. Oh well. Overall, therefore, they're more or less the same. Kum should usually get farther away first in order to get his setups so he can get in. And once that's done, he can just stick to Axel completely with nearly no way out other than super and invincible moves. Axel does have one good main option though. When he's unsure of the situation, going for his own standing dust at close range is one of the best ways out of Kum's block strings, or rather pressure strings. Primary reason is simple. Much like Jack-O, standing dust on Axel is long, but it doesn't necessarily move very far nor telegraph itself compared to many other characters. It also has good pushback, meaning that rather than waiting for Kum's next attack and trying to figure out how to outmaneuver it, there's a chance, depending on where you are, that you can just hit the standing dust and resolve the situation.
まだ本気ではありませんね。はい、勝利。親善試合第3、前例を持て。引きません。文武両道彩色権利。何をやってますギャーってのは勝つ喜びより負ける楽観の方が大きそうだ。メンゴ。ジャック王様、シューターは練れていますか？気負いたたむよう親善試合第1開始。
In this situation when Jackal has no meter and no minions, her best bet is trying to play footsies until she can toss out at least one. If she has the minions on the other side of the screen instead, The easy answer is to speed them up. That setup is one of her most useful. Giving the opponent reason to destroy one house, right in front of them in the corner, and then using that time to place the other two. A nice starting setup. When placed in this situation, Jackal should first check whether or not she has the lightning. If she does, it's easiest to just do nothing. Kum is a relatively slow-moving linear character that often has to run in, but in order to run in through what would probably soon be a wall of minions, you have to have a fair amount of guts and a lot of skills. If there are no minions to block Kum's approach, though, the situation changes quite a lot. The obvious response, as just shown, is to use the heavy tuning ball to buy time to get over Ja-Oh, but Ja-Oh can go into the air and do her down blast at Kum's landing position with a timing that makes it nearly impossible to actually care about that ball for any long period of time. She also has a lot more hitboxes that are capable of stopping Kum's strikes than most characters. This situation is, however, among the best possible. There are unreachable minions on both sides, and only one setup Kum is able to do. All of this buys Jackal all that crucial time she needs to prevent a bunch of motion from Kum's side. In terms of the flow of the match and general flow of the game, this is one character against whom you should generally be sure that they're coming for you as soon as they can as Jackal, whom is not likely to spend a lot of time coming up with a plan from the other side of the screen, because Jackal can just counter nearly all approach plans on reaction. Once again, we have the management of speeding up minions to buy Jackal time and lower Ku's safe maneuver positions. Once S House is active, Jackal mostly just has to block, as this is a character who tends to stay in positions where the situation shifts too quickly for anything useful to happen.
も金も増やせばいいわけじゃないよ。料理も喧嘩も足し算だけではダメね。
ジャック王さん、審判は練れていますか？
Characters with very visible mobility are the easiest for Jack-O to control, which is the main reason why Heihun has any trouble at all. While Heihun does have multiple methods of approaching, they are visible enough to be more or less reactable for a ton of Jack-O's footsie and spacing buttons. Meaning that after a while, this character really can just defend a bunch of stuff. This remains true even when in standard situations, meaning that Jack-O does not need to go for pressure on Coom as a generality. If she realizes that this situation is not in her favor, it's easier to just not do it. Spacing and footsies are usually the name of the game, whereas Coom is much more likely to be effective when Jack-O is trying to stick to Coom's side instead. Being such a strong spacing character also means that pushing Coom out after certain things is useful enough to buy time. Any character whose movement is linear enough or in some way slow enough to cause shifts will be a problem. And since Coom's projectile is similar to that of Lara and such characters, where it's for control but especially the heavy ones, will just disappear if you manage to hit the character, then you don't have to worry about those things. At the end of the day though, Jack-O will still generally be operating at a meter disadvantage if playing from this spacing position. And that is the key for how Coom can take advantage in the matchup, focusing on proper use of both meter and Roman cancels if needed. As you can see, similarly, Coom spends a lot of time and meter setting up situations in which she's able to destroy Jack-O's houses. went in a little too hard and was eventually able to take the space.
よかった。
なんと真っ二つではないか。ジャック王様、進化は練れていますか。大手を清い方の親善試合第一開始。
And we are back to this long-range game of spacing mastery. Keeping minions out against Faust is a matter of being really specific about when Jackal attempts to go over Faust's head. As, similar to Kum, it's difficult to help or do anything particularly strong when your houses are in front of Faust as a whole. In fact, in general, you don't have any real reason to put them down in front of him in the first place. While he cannot necessarily be beaten by Jackal's zoning as a strict thing, he is easier to take on from the air until he has slowed down or made a mistake enough for her to get an opening. And as always, remember, please block on wake up. Understanding Raven as a character is relatively simple as well. Raven is one of those zoners that uses their projectiles and zoning to set up their approach. By approaching from a specific position and challenging the opponent constantly with zoning tools so that they cannot specifically do anything about this, the character has a strength that you cannot easily get around unless you are, of course, Jat-O, who cares not for your projectiles. Or for your swooping sweeps either. Since her projectile shield does in fact recharge fairly quickly, one of her better options in general is to, whenever she has the option to use it, put it up, and when she doesn't, try to get into the air and stay out of Raven's various other nonsense. This is also one of the few matchups where she actually cares about having a house in hand to throw. It doesn't specifically matter which one. Punch House is usually the best, as Raven's attacks will normally destroy punch minions or go straight through them in ways that make it relatively useless. whereas his quicker approaches on the ground are often checked by the kick minions, and his air stuff, while not generally checked by S minions, do have to worry at least about certain things. She's also one of the only characters that can count on being able to have something on screen attacking Raven while she is sitting through Raven pressure. Positioning of houses, therefore, in spaces just outside of the corner means that by the time she gets cornered, she still has a defense. Raven must either destroy the houses on the way through or give up some of the pressure in order to go back and destroy them in the hopes of getting back in and doing more pressure. The hardest part of this match is understanding that it is functionally never Jacko's turn. It is the minion's turn, but Jacko doesn't get any turns. As able to defeat houses go, though, Raven's only average at best. Specifically understanding this means that there's really no point in Jacko going in ever. What she needs to do more so is very carefully measure when to retreat, or figure out a method that involves no actual retreating at all. Whatever she can use to knock Raven away from her to get advantage from there is probably best. Sitting on that then helps because Raven must use up a lot of meter and other the host knickknacks in order to destroy houses or stress Jacko out in general. That approach, for example, was good for saving houses, but it would probably have been better to save them by picking them up. That was probably a hard read though, as dashing into that move when you expect the opponent to stand there destroying houses is a good way to discourage them. It can be hard to get used to the idea that you just don't get a turn, but she is that sort of character in the first place. If Jacko has enough meter for the faultless defense approach, i.e. air green block, she can normally do this directly after putting down one house, as this is about the amount of time she'll get to do it, and focusing Axel's attention in the air that way gives the minion a time to come out. Axel will then generally want to launch another attack, one from far enough away to actually hit the house, but is less likely to try to go into the air or handle Jack-O's spacing. In short, just give the opponent two different things on the screen to worry about. They can, of course, as just noted, just use their Rensen in this position. But depending on which house you put down, this may not be enough to mess with the minion, and even if it is, another one's coming. Once she has the minions behind her in this way, the rest is a matter of carefully playing spacing and defense along with Elysian driver timing. This is primarily because Axel plays relatively slowly as a whole, and it's also easy more or less for Jack-O to backdash toward her houses when he makes certain approaches. Other approaches can be dealt with just by going into the air and blasting down at him, so the fact that the minions will take long to arrive is much less important in this matchup than in most. She is, after all, a character who, again, benefits from basically just blocking. Then we get this position where one has managed to change sides, but the houses have not been destroyed. From Axel's side, the solution is really simple though. Move forward. It's easy to get caught up in the idea that one must zone out other characters because he has this ability. But against Jack-O, you really should consider that you're more likely to be the one getting zoned, and therefore should approach when you can. It's much more likely that Jack-O will be manipulating your movement in ways that help her, even while she is apparently approaching. Jack-O's other strength against Faust is being able to whiff punish. But I love that we're switching to Johnny today, so it's not likely to matter. We've had Johnny more recently, but I don't believe that Jack-O was generally the one in that fight, so there's no way to tell how this is going to go other than that the players have gotten some higher experience about how to block and when to counterattack as a result of learning how to block. We have had streams recently where it has been clearer why Johnny is an intimidating character, but not an unstoppable one. He does a lot of damage once he starts, but he does take quite a while to get there against certain characters. However, among the characters in the game, he is one of the best at dealing with minions as a whole. Meaning that it requires a lot more effort from Jao to make sure that they don't get destroyed. Still, she often has the tools because of his longer recovery and more work required to get in. Oh, but forward movement into clip, and that's over. Since Johnny has so much control over the space in front of him, obviously your aim is to figure out a way to get houses behind him, but he's not going to give you a lot of options for this. Once you do have that situation set up though, you should focus your energy on keeping control of it, so that things can shift. After all, Johnny cannot generally afford to sit around in the middle of the screen forever. The minions will reach him, and he's not exactly a strong character for getting rid of them. What he is good at doing is luring you into reacting to his movement in ways that are based on trickery. What he said.
そいつを呼ぶのが勝負師の才能ってやつだ。
It is in fact a relatively similar experience here. Jacko is looking for an opening to put down a house, and another opening to do very specific things, usually picking one up. The other useful part of this, of course, is that no matter what Raven does, a house that Jacko is holding cannot be destroyed. Since Raven's orbs tend to go upward and do not in fact normally strike houses, at least not if he wants him to space control Jao from going wherever she wants, he's often spending a lot of time doing moves that have basically no effect on her. He also has moves with very long block stun, but in so doing, this doesn't make any difference because again, Jacko does not care about block stun. At least minions don't care about block stun. The slower your character's mix-ups are, the less Jacko cares about them. Raven can, however, often spare the meter required to destroy houses using that, as most of the time he gets to move forward and no one else does. High-level play between these two characters can in fact also look like this, mainly because what Raven is aiming for is the way to open up Jack-O that will crack her defense, and once she has no minions and Raven is close, that's basically it. Therefore, for this matchup to even make sense at high levels, it really has to go like this. Jack-O basically is constantly blocking and keeping Raven out for extremely long periods. As he's so mobile as a character that setting up minion tricks can actually be almost impossible. And there's the moment. Raven must give up his pressure in order to make sure the houses are destroyed. And Jack-O's job at that point is to recognize it. Without minions, this is basically what happens. It's not even a matter of fault, as for the most part, especially in the corner, there really isn't that much she can do. It just ends like that. The dead angle attack may help, but for the most part, that's it. Well, we are back on the train. Therefore, basing on standard MOBA strategy, if Jack-O has 2 houses down, Axel is likely to want to approach. In fact, he generally should want to approach in the matchup a lot of the time anyway. This is her chance to get over his head, but obviously Renson is an option. Generally, she does not want to place all 3 houses because there's no benefit to it unless she expects the opponent to stay on the other side of the screen. It also gives Axel more time, obviously. So the aim from a knockdown is to put down 2 houses and then make her approach, with the intention and hope of getting to the other side or buying enough space to play the space control game with unhittable minion farms behind her. Once this situation is set up, well, you can see what happens. Axel is good at striking them down, but once Jack-O attempts to get to the other side, you're back to where you started. He has to deal with stuff behind him, and she can mostly just defend. Your understanding of this character is very important to be based almost entirely on that concept. Jack-O does not care about block stun. No matter how long the block stun of your move is, no matter how long you've pinned her down, if you have not destroyed all her houses, you are just losing. You're giving her the win, more or less. Especially if they're behind you. Sometimes you're fine if they're in front and your moves tend to hit everywhere, but especially if they're behind you. Jack-O's goal, therefore, is to get them behind you. This is basically the exactly perfect setup in every way. minions will appear behind Axel, and S House is the one she does not need so much, but does serve a purpose in that it covers the air game space where she does not have as many good options against this stuff. Axel is therefore hoping and praying to land at least one hit to get back to where he wanted to go. But even now, the houses are still up. If she activates her projectile invincibility now, for example, or that, it just becomes a matter of waiting him out. As always, your hope is that you should never actually end up pressuring this character while she has houses up. You want to land a clean solid hit and convert into defeating her as quickly as possible. As you get higher level, obviously your skills improve and this gets easier and easier, but at the mid-levels where you might not be able to outmaneuver a Jackal player and therefore land big hits, you're going to struggle if you can't keep yourself from being sandwiched between the two. As always with Axel, we have two choices. This is a standard for all Faust play. Are you going ham or are you defending? So, before we talk any more about the matchup, since the two halves are played differently, let's see what our Axel chooses to do. Based on the movement in that spacing alone, we're going to go with going ham. And there we go. It's important to recognize that no matter what you do, at least some of this matchup is luck. Therefore, when Axel sees Faust go for an item, that's the decision you're making. The item may hurt you, it may not. Take a guess and go in, but make sure that you never change your overall approach. Because since Faust has no control over the items, stopping your approach and offense because you happen to get hit the previous time is a really bad idea. You might get hit another time, but that's not up to Faust. Axel versus Raven is one of the most interesting matchups in this game. Axel has next to no way to deal with Raven's orb. And that's about all you need to understand about it. Raven actually has other things he needs to do in the matchup, but his aim should generally be setting up orb throws. And it doesn't have to be in pressure like for most characters. He just has to throw the orb at all. Therefore, the obvious question would be, as Axel, how can I prevent Raven from throwing this orb? The first thing to understand is that the orb takes long. The second thing to understand is that Axel has 3 moves that move him forward in ways that would completely avoid a Raven player doing nearly everything Raven does, actually. The important thing to do, therefore, is basically to take the opposite of your regular approach. You can't zone Raven as a whole because Raven will throw out orb and then you can't do anything. Or he will move back out of the space, and it has basically the most built-in way of dealing with Axel zoning ever. Your hope, therefore, is that whenever you happen to land a hit, move forward, swing that, in this case Kusarigama, I guess, and make Raven's life miserable by never giving him a chance to actually do anything. Obviously, he can confirm into stuff, but at that point, do you really care? So much of his stuff is based on getting back into the correct position and block stun that you don't care. Plus, Axel's stuff goes over a lot of Raven's quote-unquote zoning. Or through it, or whatever else he wants, really. This is a matter of recognizing differences in damage potential. Using this style, it is difficult for Raven to get damage, unless Axel makes one very obvious mistake. But it's easy for Axel to get random stray damage. Trying to play the standard defense will usually get you nowhere though. In that situation, obviously, one would not do it in order to make sure one doesn't corner oneself with the moves. But other than that, Raven's stuff is actually fairly slow startup, and is just working because most people can't hit him. Axel can hit him.
UFO を見たことない人ってそもそも空をあんまり見てないらしいよ。あんたの暗い顔も抜ける方向。
Kai's matchup with Raven is really simple. Kai can use Standing Dust, also Instant Air Grinder, to block a ton of Raven stuff and DP the rest. The main thing you'd see therefore used is that. It's easy to feel as Kai, well, I'll just counter zone. This will never work. This is precisely why the Instant Air Grinder is so important. Raven has one of the least reactable fireballs in the game. And you'll hurt yourself. Simply put. If you stand too close to this character, if you don't DP in time, all of these things will basically wreck your life. Aside from that, the match is actually fairly easy. The main thing that helps is that once Kai actually has found a moment to put up his Standing Dust Grinder, he can throw out his charged edge, and then Raven really can't do anything. Therefore, what you've just seen is one of the most important combos in the game. Every time these two make contact, that Kai can do that combo, he should. There's no question at all. But this isn't the only time this is possible. Kai can actually use his standing dust in a lot of situations you would not expect. If you feel as if the situation is going to get bad for you, as a whole, just hit the button. As it reduces all of that work you have to do to deal with Raven coming at you. Standing too close to this character though is obviously not going to help. But the important part of the combo in question is that this is one of the few times where Kai gets to delay that input so that he doesn't actually have to do it as a newbie. As it's sort of a waste to do so. Oh, but moving in. Still, as an overall thing, that really comes down to be ready to DP more. As it is basically the only thing that Raven cares about. That's a good mention, yes. Dogura's Raven is intimidating. Dogra has ways of making you not react to all of that reactable stuff Raven has, and wearing you down mentally. But, let's see here, we are deciding from Kai's side, are we going ham or are we blocking it out? Generally, if you decide to block it out, this is another match where again, standing dust matters. Faust can, as you've just seen, duck under this move, but as much as it would seem like, oh well, this is a waste of time, the answer is no, because Kai gains all of the control he could possibly want when Faust is doing this, meaning that he's more likely at higher levels to try to go over anyway. Unfortunately, for those who do not know, Omni-Rabbit's stick is kinda not in the best state right now, making certain things a little difficult, like DPs. Now this match requires no introduction and probably very little discussion. These two players know basically all the tactics you could possibly need to know without factoring in tension gain difference. And even that is somewhat factored. But an extension of thought. Siren's recent training has been mostly about understanding how to play neutral, which is something Ino's very good at, but only when she plays in the correct rhythm. Getting your rhythm right on Ino is something you have to do if you can't do instant air dash into certain things. If you can do that, then you don't have to care as much, but if your opponent can easily counter it, or has proven that they are incredible at anti-airs, you still have to play the same slow, calculated beats in neutral. Neutral for many characters is learning when to put a pause between your buttons. And, obviously, sometimes to not do that. But we've discussed previously in Street Fighter and in this game that some characters just have natural advantageous rhythms versus others. In the standard situations these characters get into, if they both hit their most obvious button for the range, one character always wins. Or wins most of the time anyway. In the case of Kai and Ino, Kai has this advantage. Therefore, Ino must generally wait and block in those situations. She doesn't always have to block either, because there's that. Since her ground dash puts her aerial, she can use this to launch certain attacks that other characters would have to instant air dash in order to do, allowing her to avoid playing certain types of footsies on the ground if she's confident that the opponent is not going to move for a short period. However, these moves are not fast enough to be used as actual counter-strikes in a standard footsie situation. Meaning that you would have to get to the point where you thought of just sitting there and not doing anything for a little bit. This is also the timing and spacing that helps her win with that standing dust that we're also fond of from previous matches between the two players. As it is the other side to the riff you're seeing currently riffing. And that is the rhythm we refer to. If Ino goes for the riff every time she feels that Kai is in a particular space, Kai can always go for that move in the same space, and Kai will win. Previous discussions of these two also boils down to something relatively simple. Axel kinda needs a bit of meter to get through Ino's zoning, and Ino needs meter to deal with when Axel does that. Generally, one doesn't want to use too much meter in the matchup on either side until specifically the note is dealt with. As players get better, again, instant air dash moves tend to help out and change the situation somewhat, as well as some very spectacularly placed roam and cancel stuff. But that is functionally just another use of meter. The use I'm referring to, therefore, being on Ino's side, using her super to position herself correctly. Well, position herself correctly first, and then using her super when Axel is getting through notes. Or blitzing, because this also works in many of those situations. Since she can prevent him from launching any low attacks altogether, pleasantly controlling where the note goes. Axel's options are mostly around using green block to change the spacing between himself and Ino once close, so that he does not have to put up with the same things. You can probably see quite easily here how this flow will work. Ino versus Raven is a simple. It's almost exactly the same as Ino versus Baiken. Super jump. Nearly none of Raven's options work well against a super jumping Ino. Once she has super jump, she can move around the screen as she pleases. And this generally stresses out Raven as a whole. Being one of the characters with the highest ability to hang in the air and to just come out of the position she is in the air without having to come straight back down, she's uniquely equipped to just hover over Raven's head and annoy him. Raven's moves are, as noted before, relatively slow, and therefore don't lead to a lot of great situations for him when the opponent has evaded them by enough. The important difference between regular jump and super jump is that Raven can hit regular jumps, and it gives you trouble if he decides, fine, I'll just put out orb and not care. As just noted. If you realize you have not done the super jump, however, it does mean you should still have your air backdash, which is another good option that Neo has. So, it's just an execution thing. Did you super jump? Yes, no. If no, backdash. Or forward dash, depending on what you're doing. Beyond that, you're looking very carefully for where Raven is on the screen while you are falling from your jump. You must do your best not to focus on your own character, but to watch him specifically in those situations. In a pinch, double jump will do, but it is definitely not the better option, as it's relatively telegraphed and slower in a way that messes up the rhythm of it. Raven's counter to this is to super jump himself, but the effect is much less. Faust vs. Ino is either a super jump match or a footsies match, depending on how you decide to deal with Faust's items. If you do not fear Faust items, if you decided you're going ham, walk forward. That's all you really have to do. Ino is interestingly so strong in footsies that literally just walking forward will help defeat this character. This is because the startup of Faust's longest moves, when he's just using them for space control, is actually so long that she can block them in time. The other option, obviously, is this, but this takes forever to kill Ino. Once you've learned the opposing Faust's rhythm, she can then use Rift to be super effective on it. The reason this would not have worked before is that Faust crouches under everything as is. You really don't want to have to deal with that. But you have to get him to want to hit buttons, at which point you can hit him with Rift stuff. If you decide to play more defensively against items, then generally the super jump is more useful for you. You're waiting to see what the item is and deciding whether or not you want to do anything. On the Rapper's defensive mindset and flow, are very helpful for reading the opponent's rhythm and beats. It's basically one of his strong specializations in any game, making him a perfect, if extremely difficult, training partner for Rizzo. One of the important things to recognize about footsie characters, though, which will probably help, is understanding that just because you have reached the point in the rhythm where you should act, it does not mean that the thing you need to do is attack. If you do not feel as if you are likely to be punishing something, most of the time you just want to move. You want to move in a way that you expect your opponent to not react to. The problem with Ino's note attack is that it keeps her stationary and just changes the beat again. Instant air dash is therefore one of the better options to put in that space, simply because it is one of the least reactable things that Ino can do from far enough away for it to matter. Her standard ground dash into the move you just saw is from much closer. But at the end of the day, the problem being, you must always still respect the beat. You cannot expect your opponent to be placed on the defensive, and because you hit a button, they now are no longer ready. They must be eventually lured into thinking that you are open, or they will just keep defending. And with such a defensive character as Kai, it's almost impossible to break through or trick him into doing something that won't work on defense. Meaning that you must manipulate his beat or you simply won't be able to do anything. And that is way more lag than usual.
勝負でした。勝利退場。戦闘スタイルの異なる相手から学ぶことは実に多い。さんだよな。アクセル、マーサ、イノさん。新官は練れていますか？気負い方のよう、親善試合第一開始。
さんだよな。よし、もうしっかり覚えたよ。
パウスとマーサイノさん、シューターは練れていますか？
オペが必要ですね。
気を立たぬよう親善試合第一開始。
触らない。何が出るかな。
カウンターカウンターカウンターカウンター何が出るかな。
触らないで。平常心でここから触らない。カウンター触らないで。触らないで。カウンター何が出るかな。触らないで。カウンター
親善試合第2勝者は1人。
綺麗な血を見せる。
カウンター
次の患者が待ってるのでな。ファッションには疎いの。
シューターは練れていますか？気を立たぬよう親善試合第一開始。
石炭を
負でした。
勝利退場。
闘志ではなく殺意が向けられていた。支援もなくそこまで変質することが可能なのか。あなたは一体。
アクセルマーカーイノさん。
シンさんは寝れていますか。気をたたむよう親善試合第1開始。
イノさんだよな。よし。アクセルマーカーイノさん。
シンさんは寝れていますか。気をたたむよう親善試合第1開始。
ア イノさんだよな。よし、もうしっかり覚えた。パンとイノさん、シンさんは練れていますか？オペが必要。気負い立たぬよう親善試合第一開始。わっし何が出るかな。カウンター。触らないで。パンツと勝利。親善試合第2、勝者は1人。触らないで。カウンター。触らないで。もっと頑張って。まだ燃えきるな。イノさん勝利。親善試合第3、切磋せよ。ここからです。カウンター。カウンター。終わり。イノさん勝利。ごめんなさい。白衣の方がお好みだったかしら。それはまた今度ね。パンツとマーサカイ。シンさんは練れていますか？放ってよ。気負い立たぬよう親善試合第一開始。カウンター。正義だ上に。
らしき道とは誰かが作った道です。その賢人の道に答えがないのなら、
アクセルパー回審査は練れていますか？次は習い事ではありません。清いところの親善試合第一開始。聞きません。いい勝負でした。勝利大勝。戦闘スタイルの異なる相手から学ぶことは実に多い。私の所作もあなたの糧になれば幸いです。 パスタを真似るってところは100点だ。でも負けてしょげんな。帰る家がなくても。イノさん、アクセル。シンさんは寝れていますか？清い本領、親善試合第一開始。死ねえ。邪魔くせえな。食らっとけ。チリナ死ねえ。食らっとけ。食らっとけ。イライラさせやがって。あんた弱いね。アクセル勝利。親善試合第2全米表。伝ってんじゃねえよ。イノさんだよな。イノさん、パンスト。シンさんは寝れていますか？気を立たぬよう親善試合第一開始。オペ終了。成功です。パンスト勝利。親善試合第2勝者は1人。カウンター。カウンター。ファッションには疎いのですが。イノさん、はい。シューさんは寝れていますか？
なぶってあげる。
空来点がなくとも落胆はさせません。
Alright, and it is about that time once again, so we have come to the end of our Tuesday train, and this will likely be the last match on stream of the night. The
if you want to stop by next week, we'll be here again, of course. And we have our Dragon Ball Fighters on Thursday, and our Monday lounge is Street Fighter V. Same time, same place for all those things. We have our Dragon Ball Fighters bot content, hopefully, this Friday. And I don't know if Wednesday is completely decided, but it will be most likely one of our sandbag casuals. So everyone, thank you for stopping by, and we hope we will see you again for our next Tuesday train.